Welcome to the Land Your Bet Sports Betting Show. Thursday night football. Got the Seahawks hosting the 49ers in a division rivalry. I'm going to be going through my best bets and player prop projections for about 8 of these guys, 4 for each team. Also want you to jump into the comments, trying to run another giveaway here. So get in the comments. Let me know who you think is going to be the first touchdown scorer for both squads. For each team, want both of them. You throw that in the comments. Anybody gets both correct, we'll be throwing them into a raffle to win $100 on this one. So throwing a full Benjamin down on that. So get in the comments, give the video a like as well, and let's get it. Seahawks are 3.5-point dogs on the road, plus 158 on the money line there, and a 48.5-point total. Pretty high total between these two teams, as Seattle's actually gone over in 4 of their 5 games so far. Should mention San Francisco's won 5 in a row in this series and 4-1 against the spread in that time as well. But let's kick it off with the offense for the Niners here. 4th in passing yards, 7th in rush yards. So they've been effective for sure. It's been late game letdowns that have been the reason that they are 2-3 on the season now. In dropback EPA, 5th best, 20th in rush EPA. So what that tells me is the underlying metrics are a bit better for the pass than the run. Similar, the supporting evidence there as well in terms of adjusted yards before contact. That's a pretty big number that I like to throw out there for rushing stats. The Niners not very good at that on offense right now, just 17th in terms of adjusted yards before their running back is receiving contact from the other team. So they could be better at that. But Seattle's not exactly great at it themselves. If you're looking at the rush stuff for them, 20th in adjusted yards before contact. Now they are 10th in rushback and dropback EPA. So against the run and the pass, their expected points added per play, 10th best in the league, which obviously means they're also just 10th best in the overall EPA as well. But the San Francisco 49ers should mention also they're 2nd in total yards and 8th in EPA. So both these teams have some pretty good underlying metrics in the whole for their offense and their defense. But I will say the Seahawks have been much better against the pass. Their rushing defense specifically, obviously the yards have been a problem, but their inability to get pushed with their defensive line has hurt them a ton. Other side of the ball, the Niners defense been a little bit susceptible to the run, the big run especially so far this season. 20th in rush EPA, 9th in rushing yards, but they've blown a couple leads. So they have had the lead for a lot of the games that they've played and just haven't pulled out the victories, as we know. In terms of the passing yards that they're allowing, 12th, and rush yards 9th. But like we say, the underlying metrics say the run is a little bit more of their weakness than the pass. The other thing about both these teams, as we look at the Seahawks offense, they both play very fast. They're both in the top 8 in terms of pace of play and the amount of plays that they're running, not utilizing too much of that game clock and really getting up to the line and running their plays, especially because they have a pretty well-oiled machine on both sides in terms of their offense that has been together now for a while. And for the Seahawks, they've done a lot of the having to come back. We saw them, a lot of these numbers for them, especially the passing yards being 3rd. I see that as bloated, overinflated because of that comeback they tried to make against the Lions in that super high scoring game. And the Lions absolutely doo-doo defensive backfield as opposed to their ability to stop the rush, right? And so they've played a lot better rushing defenses than passing defenses have the Seahawks. Big reason why these numbers are probably a little inflated for the passing yards. Got to look at the injury report real quick, especially for this Niners defense. Not looking good. Everything on offense, pretty okay. George Kittle does expect to play in this one. He's always questionable throughout the week. But if you look at the D for the San Francisco squad here, Jordan Elliott, one of their defensive tackles, looking questionable. And then you've got all these questionable tags. Fred Warner missed a game. Then you've got Demetrius Flanagan fouls. He hasn't played very much this season either. Charvarius Ward now injured. Hufanga has been hurt a lot this season and last season, and Jair Brown. So both their starting safeties, a starting corner, and 2 of their best linebackers, especially in coverage, not looking good for them. Also, Dre Greenlaw also out, we should say. So they're very thin right now in the 8. What's normally a very strong unit at linebacker and in the defensive secondary looks a little bit leaky right now. And if we just go over real quick to the Seattle Seahawks, they are a lot healthier. You can see nothing on the offense there that needs to be worried about. Derek Hall, a linebacker, as well as Boy Mafe, both questionable. And Reek Woolen has been ruled out actually since I started recording this, which is not great for their defensive secondary as well. So I do think an over is a look in this game, despite how high of a number it is. The safety injuries, especially Julian Love, as I should have mentioned as well for the Seahawks, on both sides of the ball. The defense is where they're both more banged up. That's going to come into play here. As we jump into these player props that I'm looking at, quick reminder that you can get all these plays early and on time from the link here in the description of the video, wap.com/land-your-bets. Get that in there. And if you do want, we've got the sale going right now as well, 50% off for your first month if you use code OCTSALE. So just wanted to remind you guys about that in case you want to know exactly where we're putting all this stuff. But as we move forward here into this Geno Smith bet, one thing you'll note I'm consistently looking at is when we have a very high pressure defense, such as the San Francisco 49ers, they get their second in pressure percentage, despite the fact that they don't blitz that much. They have like the 17th lowest blitz percentage in the league, or 15th lowest, whatever it is, but they're not blitzing very much for how often they're getting pressure. That's something you look at for rushing quarterback and their need to get out of the pocket and scramble. Also something I like for short yardage receivers and guys like running back receivers coming out of the backfield for short yardage plays. That's kind of what I'm looking at when I get a defense like this San Francisco 49ers squad, especially when the offensive line has some question marks around it for the Seahawks. At least in the run game. Pass game's been a little bit better, but I do think Bosa is going to have some success in this game. If you look at his play versus San Francisco, which has been the similar looking defense that it's been for the last 3 years, it's still coming in this year, over in 3 of 4 versus this team, 3 of 5 this year overall, right? The thing here for the numbers is if he gets the 4 attempts, I do like him to get over about 12.5, 13.5 rushing yards. Once this gets up to about 16.5, I'm out on it, but I think he's good for close to 15 rushing yards, if not a little bit more in this one. 4 attempts at almost at 6.5 yards per attempt this season. That's something that he's done consistently in terms of the yards per attempt. So 4 should get us to like around 20 at that point, according to those numbers. Now, I can't guarantee you that the exact yards per attempt will be there, but in a situation like this, this is where I look consistently. As far as the passing yards for Gino, my thing with that in this one is 250 is nice. The defensive injuries to the San Francisco, need to know about those for sure before we feel comfortable just going in and saying, well, they're all banged up, so we can take Gino passing yards. In the past, it's been sort of a 50-50 situation for him. One game of the year, he'll go over. The other, he goes under. And there's really not as much to do with who's on the field and who's not. This is going to be a healthy Seahawks team, at least on offense, like we said. So I wouldn't necessarily be against the over for passing, but it's not a play for me. Looking at a running back, starting with Kenneth Walker for the Seahawks, and we got to look at both RBs for this team because of the fact that I don't think the rushing is going to be there as much for them in this game. I know that there are some injuries going on with the Niners, like we keep saying, but as far as the offensive line for Seattle, not very impressive with its ability to get pushed forward. If you look at their offense right now, 19th in adjusted yards, 20th in adjusted yards before contact in terms of their offensive line's ability to push forward. The Niners defense, not as good either, but I think that's going to be something that they should right the ship with. The Seattle offensive line just doesn't really have the manpower, to be honest, for the rushing, at least offensive blocking. As far as Kenneth's receiving, that's where I would lean. It's only 18.5, very good receiver out of the backfield. The thing is even when he's in the game and he's playing fully healthy as we expect him to be in this one, Zach Charbonnet is more of the receiving back, and we've seen that be the case. I mean, these are great numbers for Kenneth Walker, 8th in target share among running backs in the league, 7th in route percentage. So he's running routes a lot of the times that they have the pass plays with him in the game, and he's actually getting a really good amount of those targets for how often running backs get targeted. That said, you look at Zach Charbonnet's number, and I would just point you to the 2nd routes, 3rd route percentage, 5th receptions. So that's all among running backs in the league. So as good as Kenneth Walker's numbers are for receiving among running backs, Zach Charbonnet is better, and he's a top 3 receiver in the league at the running back spot right now, running the 2nd most routes. That's just routes in general. That's not even route participation, right? So it's just routes overall, which tells you that even though he's not on the field nearly as often as Kenneth Walker is, when he's out there, he's running a lot more routes, right? So I love the fact that he's so involved in the passing game that way. He has gone over his pretty low receiving yards prop in all 4 this season. And just to be specific about how SF guards the running back position in terms of coming out of the backfield for receptions, 13th most targets, 7th most yards that they've allowed to that position. And that holds in line with the theory that when you pressure a lot with your front 7 and mostly front 4 or 5, you're going to force the quarterback to make shorter yards plays, right? If Fred Warner's out there to cover a guy like Zach Charbonnet, this is scary for sure. But he's still done this against the 49ers at least once. Last year didn't have nearly as much participation as he has this year. And I like the fact that Seattle throws so much. They have the number 1 pass play percentage in terms of the amount of pass plays that they're running within their offense. So I think that'll continue to help a guy like Charbonnet, who's out there to catch those balls out of the backfield. We're going to go with him for the receiving over Kenneth Walker in this one. So I wanted to use outlier.bet real quick to just show you some stuff about DK Metcalf. Spoiler alert, this is not the receiver I would be targeting on the 49ers for this game. It's a 50-50 shot. I'm not saying he's not capable of doing it, but you start with the head-to-head stuff. They have keyed in on him, limited guys like DK in terms of their ability to get open with Charvarius Ward, but also bracketing them with some really good safety play. Safeties are currently questionable for the 49ers. Not that Hufanga really helps in the pass game as much, but on the other side of the ball, yeah, you're going to need some healthy safety play to help over the top on DK Metcalf so that Charvarius Ward, big physical cornerback who's also questionable, if he's out, then yeah, you look at DK. If he's in, it's a little bit more of a questionable situation in this head-to-head matchup with them. The coverage matchup for him, not quite as good either. You are going to see a good amount of man coverage from the 49ers. On the season, when we look at teams that he's played against man coverage, if you go over to 2024 so far, not quite as much man coverage for any of these teams. So it's not like this is going to be an advantage spot for him. I hate the fact that he did so poorly against the Giants last week, as I want to fade him this week, and it's not likely that he has too many bad games in a row, but he's a stay away for me only because I like Tyler Lockett, honestly, a bunch more. And for Tyler Lockett, you see him with the best coverage grade for among wide receivers on this team. Jackson Smith and Jigba doesn't look as good against this coverage. Same concept for DK Metcalf. That's what the numbers are telling me. And I do like the fact that Tyler Lockett just continues to wow us and continues to leave his play just well enough that he's going over his props, but they're not rising too greatly, right? This prop at about 45 and a half yards is something he's covered in 4 of 5 this season. And the targets and participation is there for him. 6.5 targets per game, 4.4 receptions at 12 yards per reception. So with those averages alone, you are getting a little bit of value on the fact that he beats the prop line that he has with his averages. He's at 4.5 targets over his plus 125, but 4+ targets, which I said he's averaging on the season, 4+ targets. Well, he's averaging more targets, but the receptions. If he gets the receptions rather, if he gets 4+ receptions, he should be good at 12 yards per reception for the 48. But it's at 4.5. So it indicates that like they're actually giving it to us at 5. There's still a decent likelihood, implied probability of like 49% that he's going to go over 4.5. So it's still a pretty good play here, just the numbers alone for Lockett. He's my favorite bet for a receiver out of for the Seattle team. 49ers player props. Man, it's just tough for me to go with any wide receivers or receivers in general for this team with the amount of weapons that they now have, especially once you throw Jawan Jennings in there, and George Kittle's going to play in this game. It really seems like it, unless he randomly just tweaks a hammy during a sprint in practice, which is something he's liable to do. That's usually why I'm fixated on the running back for this team, for the 49ers versus any of the other guys. We know Jordan Mason's going to get Christian McCaffrey-like usage, and that's why he would be my preferred play for an over on his rushing yards. Seattle does allow the 7th most rushing yards to running back specifically. Other teams have had a good amount of wide receiver rushes and quarterback rushes. Seattle hasn't played very many mobile quarterbacks this year, and they're, as a result, not giving up total rushing yards as much, but they are giving up rushing yards to the running back, right? And 7th most to that position. And if you look at the offensive versus defensive line matchup, while the rush offensive line for the 49ers hasn't been anything to where it's been in past years under Shanahan or even before, they're still better than the Seahawks defensive line in terms of moving the other forward or backwards, right? And they do run the ball a ton as a result. Like, they know that they can get enough success and it opens up their passes that they have run the ball at the 9th highest percentage in the NFL. Passing it rather, a bunch fewer times. And Brock Purdy's at about 31.5 passing attempts. Pretty actually on the high side. I'd lean under to that, but I don't see him going much over that. This is going to be, I think, a decently high scoring game, but both teams are probably going to have success in opposite ways. I do think Gino will be passing a bit more, and I do think that the 49ers will have a lot of success on the ground and not be forced to pass it too much. For Jordan Mason, his numbers right here at about 81.5 rushing yards, that's right at his averages. 4.8 yards per attempt, 17.5 carries is what he's looking at as his line for this game. How many attempts is he going to have? Well, if he has 17 and he gets 4.8, he's right at 81.5 yards. If he gets 18, he's obviously going to go over that. And if he can get up to about 5 yards per carry, no matter what, he should be good to go. So I think if he does get close to the 17 attempts that he is predicted to get by most of the books here, then we're looking at a pretty good number, close to 100 yards for him. far as receivers for the Niners go, like I said, I'm really staying away from any of them. But if I were going to go anywhere, the thing I would hone in on here is George Kittle, looking healthy again. Once again, questionable. He's always questionable. I'm not too worried about that. At 4.5 receptions, the receiving yards at 48.5. And if you look at his receptions per game, 4.3, let's actually just get this to 2024, 5.8 receptions on 7.3 targets. So yeah, looking really good this season, but he fluctuates so much. You can see it's close to it or it's right at it. At 48.5, I do think this is a good number versus a team that, while Seattle's only allowed the 10th most receiving yards per game, they have allowed that's 5th most to tight ends in the league right now. So they are getting chewed up by tight ends. They don't have that very good linebacker play at all, to be honest. Their defensive line getting pressure in the pass game that really helps them. But they're, as far as the coverage goes in that sense, not as good in the safeties or the linebackers for this team. So George Kittle would have the most favorable matchup. He also has the most favorable coverage matchup, according to how Seattle plays defense, which is the 8th most man coverage. So Kittle is able to beat a lot of these guys one-on-one. Tight ends who are athletic, such as Kelsey on Monday Night Football this past week that we saw do well against the Saints team that plays a lot of man coverage. That would be the case for George Kittle. He's my strongest lean for a receiver for the Niners. And that is all the time I have for you guys in this one. Definitely want to make sure to subscribe to that page. Go ahead and like the video for me. And if you do want to jump in the Discord, there's a free aspect to the Discord. That is in the link is in the description of the video. And if you do want to make sure that you get all of the picks that I'm making and the card that I've got with the write-ups and everything, definitely head to that link that I mentioned, wap.com / all the stuff here, land-your-bets. Get all of that stuff so that you don't miss any of the plays that I'm making. Until I see y'all next, happy betting.